The German occupation of Czechoslovakia began with the Nazi annexation of Czechoslovakia's northern and western border regions, known collectively as the Sudetenland, under terms outlined by the Munich Agreement. German leader Adolf Hitler's pretext for this effort was the alleged privations suffered by the ethnic German population living in those regions. New and extensive Czechoslovak border fortifications were also located in the same area. Following the Anschluss of Austria to Nazi Germany, in March 1938, the conquest of Czechoslovakia became Hitler's next ambition. The incorporation of the Sudetenland into Nazi Germany left the rest of Czechoslovakia weak and it became powerless to resist subsequent occupation. On March 16, 1939, the German Wehrmacht moved into the remainder of Czechoslovakia and, from Prague Castle, Hitler proclaimed Bohemia and Moravia the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. The occupation ended with the surrender of Germany following World War II. Demands for Sudeten autonomy. Sudeten German pro-Nazi leader Konrad Heinlein offered the Sudeten German Party as the agent for Hitler's campaign. Heinlein met with Hitler in Berlin on March 28, 1938, where he was instructed to raise demands unacceptable to the Czechoslovak government led by President Edvard Beneš. On April 24, the SDP issued the Karlsbader program, demanding autonomy for the Sudetenland and the freedom to profess Nazi ideology. If Heinlein's demands were granted, the Sudetenland would then be able to align itself with Nazi Germany. I am asking neither that Germany be allowed to oppress 3.5 million Frenchmen, nor am I asking that 3.5 million Englishmen be placed at our mercy. Rather I am simply demanding that the oppression of 3.5 million Germans in Czechoslovakia cease and that the inalienable right to self-determination take its place. Adolf Hitler's speech at the NSDAP Congress 1938. The Munich Agreement. As the tepid reaction to the German Anschluss with Austria had shown, the governments of France, the United Kingdom and Czechoslovakia were set on avoiding war at any cost. The French government did not wish to face Nazi Germany alone and took its lead from the British government and its Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. Chamberlain contended that Sudeten German grievances were justified and believed that Hitler's intentions were limited. Britain and France, therefore, advised Czechoslovakia to concede to the Nazi demands. Beneš resisted, and on May 20, 1938 a partial mobilization was underway in response to possible German invasion. 10 days later, Hitler signed a secret directive for war against Czechoslovakia to begin no later than October 1. In the meantime, the British government demanded that Beneš request a mediator. Not wishing to sever his government's ties with Western Europe, Beneš reluctantly accepted. The British appointed Lord Runciman and instructed him to persuade Beneš to agree to a plan acceptable to the Sudeten Germans. On September 2, Beneš submitted the fourth plan, granting nearly all the demands of the Karlsbader program. Intent on obstructing conciliation, however, the SDP held demonstrations that provoked police action in Ostrava on September 7. The Sudeten Germans broke off negotiations on September 13, after which violence and disruption ensued. As Czechoslovak troops attempted to restore order, Heinlein flew to Germany, and on September 15 issued a proclamation demanding the takeover of the Sudetenland by Germany. On the same day, Hitler met with Chamberlain and demanded the swift takeover of the Sudetenland by the Third Reich under threat of war. The Czechs, Hitler claimed, were slaughtering the Sudeten Germans. Chamberlain referred the demand to the British and French governments. Both accepted. The Czechoslovak government resisted, arguing that Hitler's proposal would ruin the nation's economy and lead ultimately to German control of all of Czechoslovakia. The United Kingdom and France issued an ultimatum, making a French commitment to Czechoslovakia contingent upon acceptance. On September 21, Czechoslovakia capitulated. The next day, however, Hitler added new demands, insisting that the claims of Poland and Hungary also be satisfied. The Czechoslovak capitulation precipitated an outburst of national indignation. In demonstrations and rallies, Czechs and Slovaks called for a strong military government to defend the integrity of the state. a new cabinet under General Jan Serova €1/2 was installed, and on September 23, 1938 a decree of general mobilization was issued. The Czechoslovak army modern and possessing an excellent system of frontier fortifications was prepared to fight. The Soviet Union announced its willingness to come to Czechoslovakia's assistance. Bohemia, however, refused to go to war without the support of the Western powers. On September 28, Chamberlain appealed to Hitler for a conference. Hitler met the next day, at Munich, with the chiefs of governments of France, Italy and Britain. The Czech government was neither invited nor consulted. On September 29, the Munich Agreement was signed by Germany, Italy, France, and Britain. The Czechoslovak government capitulated on September 30 and agreed to abide by the agreement. The Munich Agreement stipulated that Czechoslovakia must cede Sudeten territory to Germany. German occupation of the Sudetenland would be completed by October 10. An international commission representing Germany, Britain, France, Italy, and Czechoslovakia would supervise a plebiscite to determine the final frontier. Britain and France promised to join in an international guarantee of the new frontiers against unprovoked aggression. Germany and Italy, however, would not join in the guarantee until the Polish and Hungarian minority problems were settled. On October 5, 1938, Bohemia resigned as president of Czechoslovakia, realizing that the fall of Czechoslovakia was a fait accompli. Following the outbreak of World War II, he would form a Czechoslovak government in exile in London. The First Vienna Award. In early November 1938, under the First Vienna Award, which was a result of the Munich Agreement, Czechoslovakia after it had failed to reach a compromise with Hungary and Poland was forced by Germany and Italy to cede southern Slovakia to Hungary, while Poland invaded Zaolzie territory shortly after. As a result, Bohemia, Moravia and Silesia lost about 38% of their combined area to Germany, with some 3.2 million German and 750,000 Czech inhabitants. Hungary, in turn, received 11,882 km2 in southern Slovakia and southern Ruthenia. According to a 1941 census, about 86.5% of the population in this territory was Hungarian. Meanwhile, Poland annexed the town of Ijeszka 1/2 to Angstrom equal or more than N with the surrounding area, some 250,000 inhabitants. Poles made about 36% of population, and two minor border areas in northern Slovakia, more precisely in the regions Spia and Orava, 4,280 inhabitants, only 0.3% Poles. Soon after Munich, 115,000 Czechs and 30,000 Germans fled to the remaining rump of Czechoslovakia. According to the Institute for Refugee Assistance, the actual count of refugees on March 1, 1939 stood at almost 150,000. On December 4, 1938, there were elections in Sudetenland, in which 97.32% of the adult population voted for Nazi Party. About 500,000 Sudeten Germans joined the Nazi Party, which was 17.34% of the German population in Sudetenland. This means the Sudetenland was the most pro-Nazi region in the Third Reich. Because of their knowledge of the Czech language, many Sudeten Germans were employed in the administration of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia and in Nazi organizations. The most notable was Karl Hermann Frank, the SS and Police General and Secretary of State in the Protectorate. The Second Republic, the greatly weakened Czechoslovak Republic, was forced to grant major concessions to the non-Czechs. The Executive Committee of the Slovak People's Party met at Angstrom 1/2 Ilina on October 5, 1938, and with the acquiescence of all Slovak parties except the Social Democrats formed an autonomous Slovak government under Josef Tiso. Similarly, the two major factions in Subcarpathian Ruthenia, the Russophiles and Ukrainophiles, agreed on the establishment of an autonomous government, which was constituted on October 8. Reflecting the spread of modern Ukrainian national consciousness, the pro-Ukrainian faction, led by Avestin Voloshin, gained control of the local government and Subcarpathian Ruthenia was renamed Carpatho Ukraine. A last-ditch attempt to save Czechoslovakia from total ruin was made by the British and French governments, who on January 27, 1939, concluded an agreement of financial assistance with the Czech government. In this agreement, the British and French governments undertook to lend the Czech government a 8 million currency and make a gift of a 4 million currency. Part of the funds was allocated to help resettle Czechs who had fled from territories lost to Czechoslovakia in the Munich Agreement or the Vienna Arbitration Award. In November 1938, Emil Harkor succeeding Benia was elected president of the Federated Second Republic, renamed Czechoslovakia and consisting of three parts, Bohemia and Moravia, Slovakia, and Carpatho-Ukraine. Lacking its natural frontier and having lost its costly system of border fortification, the new state was militarily indefensible. In January 1939, negotiations between Germany and Poland broke down. Hitler intent on war against Poland needed to eliminate Czechoslovakia first. He scheduled a German invasion of Bohemia and Moravia for the morning of March 15. In the interim, he negotiated with the Slovak People's Party and with Hungary to prepare the dismemberment of the republic before the invasion. On March 13, he invited Tiso to Berlin and on March 14, the Slovak Diet convened and unanimously declared Slovak independence. Carpatho-Ukraine also declared independence but Hungarian troops occupied it on March 15 and eastern Slovakia on March 23. Hitler summoned President Harkar to Berlin and during the early hours of March 15, informed Harkar of the imminent German invasion. Threatening a Luftwaffe attack on Prague, Hitler persuaded Harkar to order the capitulation of the Czechoslovak army. Harkar suffered a heart attack during the meeting, and had to be kept awake by medical staff, eventually giving in and accepting Hitler's surrender terms. Then on the morning of March 15, German troops entered Bohemia and Moravia, meeting practically no resistance. The Hungarian invasion of Carpatho-Ukraine encountered resistance but the Hungarian army quickly crushed it. On March 16, Hitler went to Czechoslovakia and from Prague Castle proclaimed the German Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Thus, independent Czechoslovakia collapsed in the wake of foreign aggression and internal tensions. Subsequently, interwar Czechoslovakia has been idealized by its proponents as the only bastion of democracy surrounded by authoritarian and fascist regimes. It has also been condemned by its detractors as an artificial and unworkable creation of intellectuals supported by the great powers. Both views have some validity. Interwar Czechoslovakia comprised lands and peoples that were far from being integrated into a modern nation-state. Moreover, the dominant Caesar who had suffered political discrimination under the Habsburgs were not able to cope with the demands of other nationalities. However, some of the minority demands served as mere pretexts to justify intervention by Nazi Germany. Czechoslovakia was able to maintain a viable economy and a democratic political system under the adverse circumstances of the interwar period. Second World War. Division of Czechoslovakia. Shortly before World War II, Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. Its territory was divided into the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia and the newly declared Slovak state, while the considerable part of Czechoslovakia was directly joined to the Third Reich. Some parts were annexed by Poland and Hungary in the fall of 1938. The Zaolzie region was directly joined to the Third Reich after the German invasion of Poland in September 1939. The German economy burdened by heavy militarization urgently needed foreign currency. Setting up an artificially high exchange rate between the Czechoslovak koruna and the Reichsmark brought consumer goods to Germans. Czechoslovakia was a major manufacturer of machine guns, tanks, and artillery, most of which were assembled in the Angstrom Koda factory and had a modern army of 35 divisions. Many of these factories continued to produce Czech designs until factories were converted for German designs. Czechoslovakia also had other major manufacturing companies. Entire steel and chemical factories were moved from Czechoslovakia and reassembled in Linz, Austria, which incidentally remains a heavily industrialized sector of the country. Czech resistance. Benia the leader of the Czechoslovak government in exile together with František Moravka head of Czechoslovak military intelligence organized and coordinated a resistance network. HK, Prime Minister Alois Eliasson, and the Czech resistance acknowledged Benia's leadership. Active collaboration between London and the Czechoslovak home front was maintained throughout the war years. The most important event of the resistance was the Operation Anthropoid, the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, SS leader Heinrich Himmler's deputy and the then protector of Bohemia and Moravia. Infuriated, Hitler ordered the arrest and execution of 10,000 randomly selected Czechs, but, after consultations, he reduced his response. Over 10,000 were arrested, and at least 1,300 executed. The assassination resulted in one of the most well-known reprisals of the war. The villages of Lidis and Lee 3/4 AKY were completely destroyed by the Nazis. All men over 16 years of age from the village were murdered and the rest of the population was sent to Nazi concentration camps where many women and nearly all the children were killed. The Czech resistance comprised four main groups. The Army Command coordinated with a multitude of spontaneous groupings to form the defense of the nation with branches in Britain and France. Czechoslovak units and formations with overwhelming majority of Czechs served with the Polish Army, the French Army, the Royal Air Force, the British Army, and the Red Army. Thousands of Czech troops fought alongside the British during the war in areas such as North Africa and Palestine. Among other, Czech fighter pilot, Sergeant Jos František was one of the most famous Czech personalities as being among the few top aces in the Battle of Britain. Benia's collaborators, led by Prokop Drtina, created the political centre. The Pash was nearly destroyed by arrests in November 1939, after which younger politicians took control. Social Democrats and leftist intellectuals, in association with such groups as trade unions and educational institutions, constituted the Committee of the Petition We Remain Faithful. The Communist Party of Czechoslovakia was the fourth major resistance group. The CSOR had been one of over 20 political parties in the Democratic First Republic, but it had never gained sufficient votes to unsettle the democratic government. After the Munich Agreement, the leadership of the CSOR moved to Moscow and the party went underground. Until 1943, however, CSOR resistance was weak. The Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact in 1939 had left the CSOR in disarray. But ever faithful to the Soviet line, the CSOR began a more active struggle against the Nazis after Germany's attack on the Soviet Union in June 1941. The democratic groups ON, PASH, and PVVZA united in early 1940 and formed the Central Committee of the Home Resistance. Involved primarily in intelligence gathering, the ASH-VOD cooperated with the Soviet intelligence organization in Prague. Following the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, the democratic groups attempted to create a united front that would include the CSOR. Heydrich's appointment in the fall thwarted these efforts. By mid-1942, the Nazis had succeeded in exterminating the most experienced elements of the Czech resistance forces. Czech forces regrouped in 1942–1943. The Council of the Throw in which the communist underground was also represented emerged as the focal point of the resistance. The A3 prepared to assist the liberating armies of the US and the Soviet Union. In cooperation with Red Army partisan units, the A3 developed a guerrilla structure. Guerrilla activity intensified with rising number of parachuted units in 1944, leading to establishment of partisan groups, such as 1st Czechoslovak Partisan Brigade of Jan Angstrom 1/2 Ear 3/4 Car, Jan Kozina Brigade or MISTR Jan Hus Brigade, and especially after the formation of a provisional Czechoslovak government in Coice on April 4, 1945. National committees took over the administration of towns as the Germans were expelled. More than 4,850 such committees were formed between 1944 and the end of the war under the supervision of the Red Army. On May 5, a national uprising began spontaneously in Prague, and the newly formed Czech National Council almost immediately assumed leadership of the revolt. Over 1,600 barricades were erected throughout the city, and some 30,000 Czech men and women battled for 3 days against 37,000 40,000 German troops backed by tanks and artillery. On May 8, the German Wehrmacht capitulated. Soviet troops arrived on May 9. Slovak National Uprising. The Slovak National Uprising was an armed struggle between Nazi German Wehrmacht forces and rebel Slovak troops from October 1944. It was centered at Banská Bystrica. The rebel Slovak army, formed to fight the Nazis, had an estimated 18,000 soldiers in August, a total which first increased to 47,000 after mobilization on September 9, 1944, and later to 60,000, plus 20,000 partisans. However, in late August, German troops were able to disarm the Eastern Slovak army, which was the best equipped, and thus significantly decrease the power of the Slovak army. Many members of this force were sent to concentration camps in the Third Reich. Others escaped and joined partisan units or returned home. The Slovaks were aided in the uprising by soldiers and partisans from the Soviet Union, France, Czech Republic and Poland. In total, 32 nations were involved in the uprising. Czechoslovak government in exile. Edvard Beneš had resigned as president of the First Czechoslovak Republic on October 5, 1938 after the Nazi coup. In London, he and other Czechoslovak exiles organized a Czechoslovak government in exile and negotiated to obtain international recognition for the government and a renunciation of the Munich Agreement and its consequences. After World War II broke out, a Czechoslovak National Committee was constituted in France, and under Beneš's presidency sought international recognition as the exiled government of Czechoslovakia. This attempt led to some minor successes, such as the French-Czechoslovak Treaty of October 2, 1939, which allowed for the reconstitution of the Czechoslovak army on French territory, yet full recognition was not reached. Beneš hoped for a restoration of the Czechoslovak state in its pre-Munich form after the anticipated Allied victory, a false hope. The government in exile with Beneš as president of Republika was set up in June 1940 in exile in London, with the president living at Aston Abbotts. On July 18, 1940, it was recognized by the British government. Belatedly, the Soviet Union and the US recognized the exiled government. In 1942, Allied repudiation of the Munich Agreement established the political and legal continuity of the First Republic and de jure recognition of Beneš's de facto presidency. The success of Operation Anthropoida Euro, which resulted in the British-backed assassination of one of Hitler's top henchmen, Reichsprotector of Bohemia and Moravia Reinhard Heydrich, by Józef Gabek and Jan Kibia on 27 May influenced the Allies in this repudiation. The Munich Agreement had been precipitated by the subversive activities of the Sudeten Germans. During the latter years of the war, Beneš worked toward resolving the German minority problem and received consent from the Allies for a solution based on a post-war transfer of the Sudeten German population. The First Republic had been committed to a Western policy in foreign affairs. The Munich Agreement was the outcome. Beneš determined to strengthen Czechoslovak security against future German aggression through alliances with Poland and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, however, objected to a tripartite Czechoslovak-Polish-Soviet commitment. In December 1943, Beneš's government concluded a treaty just with the Soviets. Beneš's interest in maintaining friendly relations with the Soviet Union was motivated also by his desire to avoid Soviet encouragement of a post-war communist coup in Czechoslovakia. Beneš worked to bring Czechoslovak communist exiles in Britain into cooperation with his government, offering far-reaching concessions, including nationalization of heavy industry and the creation of local people's committees at the war's end. In March 1945, he gave key cabinet positions to Czechoslovak communist exiles in Moscow. Especially after the Nazi reprisals for the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, most of the Czech resistance groups demanded, based on German Nazi terror during occupation, the final solution of the German question, which would have to be solved by deportation of the ethnic Germans from their homeland. These reprisals included massacres in villages Lidis and Lee 3/4 AKY, although these villages were not connected with Czech resistance. These demands were adopted by the government in exile, which sought the support of the Allies for this proposal, beginning in 1943. During the occupation of Czechoslovakia, the government in exile promulgated a series of laws that are now referred to as the Bohemia decrees. One part of these decrees dealt with the status of ethnic Germans and Hungarians in post-war Czechoslovakia, and laid the ground for the deportation of some 3 million Germans and Hungarians from the land that had been their home for centuries. The Bohemia decrees declared that German property was to be confiscated without compensation. However, the final agreement authorizing the forced population transfer of the Germans was not reached until August 2, 1945 at the end of the Potsdam Conference. End of the war. On May 8, 1944, Bohemia signed an agreement with Soviet leaders stipulating that Czechoslovak territory liberated by Soviet armies would be placed under Czechoslovak civilian control. On September 21, Czechoslovak troops formed in the Soviet Union liberated the village Karlinov, the first liberated settlement of Czechoslovakia near the Dukla Pass in northeastern Slovakia. Czechoslovakia was liberated mostly by Soviet troops, supported by Czech and Slovak resistance, from the east to the west. Only southwestern Bohemia was liberated by other Allied troops from the west. Except for the brutalities of the German occupation in Bohemia and Moravia, Czechoslovakia suffered relatively little from the war. Even at the end of the war, German troops massacred Czech civilians, as was for example in massacre in Trhova Kamenis or massacre in Javo on registered trademark ACO. A provisional Czechoslovak government was established by the Soviets in the eastern Slovak city of Košice on April 4, 1945. National committees took over the administration of towns as the Germans were expelled. Bratislava was taken by the Soviets on April 4. Prague was taken on May 9 by Soviet troops during the Prague offensive. When the Soviets arrived, Prague was already in a general state of confusion due to the Prague uprising. Soviet and other Allied troops were withdrawn from Czechoslovakia in the same year. On May 5, 1945, in the last moments of the war in Europe, the Prague uprising began. It was an attempt by the Czech resistance to liberate the city of Prague from German occupation during World War II. The uprising went on until May 8, 1945, ending in a ceasefire the day before the arrival of the Red Army and one day after Victory in Europe Day. It is estimated that about 345,000 World War II casualties were from Czechoslovakia, 277,000 of them Jews. As many as 144,000 Soviet troops died during the liberation of Czechoslovakia. Annexation of Subcarpathian Ruthenia by the Soviet Union. In October 1944, Subcarpathian Ruthenia was taken by the Soviets. A Czechoslovak delegation under František Němec was dispatched to the area. The delegation was to mobilize the liberated local population to form a Czechoslovak army and to prepare for elections in cooperation with recently established national committees. Loyalty to a Czechoslovak state was tenuous in Carpathian Ruthenia. Bohemia's proclamation of April 1944 excluded former collaborationist Hungarians, Germans and the Rusinophile Ruthenian followers of Andrzej Brody and the Fencik Party from political participation. This amounted to approximately 1/3 of the population. Another 1/3 was communist, leaving 1/3 of the population presumably sympathetic to the Czechoslovak Republic. Upon arrival in Subcarpathian Ruthenia, the Czechoslovak delegation set up headquarters in Kast, and on October 30 issued a mobilization proclamation. Soviet military forces prevented both the printing and the posting of the Czechoslovak proclamation and proceeded instead to organize the local population. Protests from Bohemia's government were ignored. Soviet activities led much of the local population to believe that Soviet annexation was imminent. The Czechoslovak delegation was also prevented from establishing a cooperative relationship with the local national committees promoted by the Soviets. On November 19, the Communists meeting in Mukakovo issued a resolution requesting separation of Subcarpathian Ruthenia from Czechoslovakia and incorporation into the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. On November 26, the Congress of National Committees unanimously accepted the resolution of the Communists. The Congress elected the National Council and instructed that a delegation be sent to Moscow to discuss union. The Czechoslovak delegation was asked to leave Subcarpathian Ruthenia. Negotiations between the Czechoslovak government and Moscow ensued. Both Czech and Slovak communists encouraged Bohemia to cede Subcarpathian Ruthenia. The Soviet Union agreed to postpone annexation until the post-war period to avoid compromising Bohemia's policy based on the pre-Munich frontiers. The treaty ceding Carpathian Ruthenia to the Soviet Union was signed in June 1945. Czechs and Slovaks living in Subcarpathian Ruthenia and Ruthenians living in Czechoslovakia were given the choice of Czechoslovak or Soviet citizenship. Expulsion of Germans from Czechoslovakia. In May 1945, Czechoslovak troops took possession of the borderland. A Czechoslovak administrative commission composed exclusively of Czechs was established. Sudeten Germans were subjected to restrictive measures and conscripted for compulsory labor. On June 15, however, Bohemia called Czechoslovak authorities to order. In July, Czechoslovak representatives addressed the Potsdam Conference and presented plans for a humane and orderly transfer of the Sudeten German population. There were substantial exceptions from expulsions that applied to about 244,000 ethnic Germans who were allowed to remain in Czechoslovakia. Following groups of ethnic Germans were not deported: anti-fascists, persons crucial for industries, those married with ethnic Czechs. It is estimated that between 700,000 and 800,000 Germans were affected by wild expulsions between May and August 1945. The expulsions were encouraged by Czechoslovak politicians and were generally carried out by the order of local authorities, mostly by groups of armed volunteers. However, in some cases it was initiated or pursued by assistance of the regular army. The expulsion according the Potsdam Conference proceeded from January 25, 1946 till October of that year. An estimated 1.6 million ethnic Germans were deported to the American zone of what would become West Germany. An estimated 800,000 were deported to the Soviet zone. Several thousand died violently during the expulsion and many more died from hunger and illness as a consequence. These casualties include violent deaths and suicides, deaths in internment camps, and natural causes. The Joint Czech-German Commission of Historians stated in 1996 following numbers: the deaths caused by violence and abnormal living conditions amount approximately to 10,000 persons killed. Another 5,000 6,000 people died of unspecified reasons related to expulsion, making the total amount of victims of the expulsion 15,000 16,000. Approximately 225,000 Germans remained in Czechoslovakia, of whom 50,000 emigrated or were expelled soon after. See also, Folgra 1/4n, the Nazi invasion plan for Czechoslovakia rendered obsolete by the Munich Agreement. Lety concentration camp, Hodonin concentration camp, Czechoslovak border fortifications built 1935 1938 against Nazi Germany, Battle of Shuja Barracks, Karel Pavlik, Western Betrayal, References. External links: Hitler unregistered trademark S directive for OE Operation Green